It is currently November 5th of the year 2024. The American presidential election is going on as we speak. The British Columbia provincial election happened on October 19th, 2024. And I am still talking about the BC provincial election because for some reason, Elections BC is the worst organization on the planet when it comes to counting ballots. We have found a box of ballots in Prince George somewhere in a riding that the Conservatives admittedly won handily and it won't change the results, but just 865 ballots or so just left uncounted. Somebody just forgot to count this entire box, and yet they had finalized the results before finding it, not realizing that there was an entire ballot box that they hadn't counted. But we also have problems in one of the ridings where there is a judicial recount set to happen on November 7th to 8th, or I think it might be 6th to 7th, where the NDP are only leading by 21 votes. It used to be 27 votes, but they also found a computer glitch that meant that certain ballots weren't counted, and now it's fallen from 27 votes to just a 21 vote lead. I remember I was called an election denier a few days after the election when I had problems with the processes that BC elections had had for mail in voting and for telephone voting. And I thought it was very messy. The fact that we thought a few days after the election, 49,000 ballots had been postmarked on the 19th and still had to be counted. And over the next few days, we had then found out another 16,000 ballots had also come in, apparently postmarked for the 19th. I'm not saying anything's happening or it's rigged, but obviously processes need to be fixed. And me merely saying that had a bunch of leftists and people in the legacy media trying to dunk on me for it when I had a perfectly reasonable position. And now BC Premier, NDP leader David Eby agrees with me because he is going to have an all parties committee or panel on reviewing BC election procedures. This is absolutely wild. But first, we will go into the ballots still left to count and the judicial recounts, what we can expect to happen. And then I'm just going to keep ranting on how stupid this whole thing is. Absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, but before I get into the exact ballot issues, I also want to remind you all about 75% of you watching this video right now are not actually subscribers to the channel. So make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this video so that you'll keep seeing my videos in the future and not just popping up at random. But, anyways, without further ado, let's get into this recent news out of the riding of Surrey Guildford. Robert Shaw covering this from where is he? Check News. Thank you for doing this all, Robert Shaw. So, before we read the top post there, here is the bottom post from November 4th, just yesterday. And he says, New. The BCNDP Gary Begg's lead in Surrey Guildford has shrunk from 27 votes to 21 votes due to the missing miscounted ballot issues Elections BC revealed today. The NDP majority government hangs in the balance of this riding. Judicial recounts run November 7th to 8th. And apparently, what had happened in this case, or maybe I'm confusing it with another case, that as they're sticking ballots in the tabulators, there was just a glitch and certain ballots were not counted. They were basically inserted in, tries to scan it, fails, drops it in the ballot box anyways, but it wasn't actually fully counted. So the amount of votes it had totaled was not actually the total amounts of paper ballots in the tabulator. And again, it's not that they are deliberately doing this. Who would deliberately try and mess with just like a handful of 14 ballots? Not really anybody. But it's proving let's stop using tabulators. It's not foolproof. Paper costs less, and there's no actual problems with just hiring more ballot workers. If anything, it creates a bunch of jobs for people to be able to have for a month to be able to work for PC elections, organizing the polling stations, counting ballots, all of this stuff, and we can get results same day. And it's also very easy to check our work because we're already hand counting. And if we think there is a discrepancy, we can change who's counting which piles, recount them, and make sure everything is squared away. But because we need to be always progressing into the future, we must always be using tabulators or whatever the new fangled mechanical way of voting is. Stop it. Paper ballots work. They're pretty foolproof. Also, in person voting works. I don't like advance voting going on forever and ever. There should maybe be a couple of days of advance voting, and it should be really close to the actual election day. Because if you're voting before the entire election narrative has played out, I question a little bit on of whether that would have your vote would have been changed if you saw the full election play out. And that could hurt or harm a party I like or dislike. So, and it's a very neutral way of doing things. You should have to watch the entire movie before you decide if you like it or don't like it. You might vote for it for a party that you didn't actually see fall on its face the day before election day and do something stupid or announce a crazy policy. This is how elections generally should work. And it's never affected turnout. If anything, turnout keeps going down for elections, no matter how much easier we make voting. I think you should actually have some skin in the game when you go out and vote, that you should have to, maybe walk out of your house, get into your car, or walk down the street. It shows that you care enough. Because the problem I have with mail in votes is not that it's fraudulent or anything like that. You'd have to be incredibly crafty and have a lot of time on your hands to be able to basically fake a bunch of mail-in ballots. But what it does is it leads to lazy voting. A BC, like a political party worker, could come to your house and just help you request a ballot and then come back and help you fill it in. Something that you would have never done unless they showed up and you don't really care that much. So I'd rather we have people voting who actually care to vote themselves rather than a bunch of people who are just merely siding with someone that I guess they're okay with voting as long as they do all the work for them. That's not really much of a vote in my mind. Obviously, it still counts if that's the rule, and parties should adapt themselves to what the rules are. But like another creator who I fully endorse, Frank Vaughn, said, he lives in Saskatchewan, was covering the Saskatchewan election. Why is it that in rural areas, in like Athabasca riding in Saskatchewan, one of the big, really like the massive rural ridings that actually the NDP wins in Saskatchewan, there's two of them right side by side at the north part of the province. Why in Athabasca was there only 31 people requesting mail in ballots? In a hyper rural riding where you would assume people would be more incentivized to have a ballot mailed to them and then they return it that way so they don't have to drive potentially 35 minutes to the nearest polling station or maybe an hour to the nearest advanced polling station because they're not exactly going to scatter the entire riding with hundreds and hundreds of advanced polling stations to be within 10 minutes of everyone. It takes a while. And to me, and then you'd see like Regina and Saskatoon ridings where there were thousands, like 1,300 mail-in ballot requests in a riding where you could walk down the street and vote in 10 minutes. At the furthest point of a riding, you could easily go and vote within 10 minutes. And what that says to me is that it's really a lot of political parties basically agitating people to take up mail-in ballots. People who wouldn't have voted unless a poll worker came to their house, or not poll worker, but a party worker came to their house and told them to request a ballot, then came back and bothered them to fill it out. It's gamifying elections, and I've never really liked that. But now let's get back to this. I'm sorry, I went so off base there for a second. But hopefully you guys are still following along. But Robert Shaw now says today, just 3 hours ago, new Elections BC says it was actually 28 votes missing, miscounted in Surrey Guildford, not the 14 it reported yesterday. The margin of NDP victory right now remains at 21 votes, pending the judicial recount this week. So I think they also had, so they couldn't even get the amount of ballots they found right. And I'm pretty sure this is also has nothing to do with the glitch. So the glitch moved a bunch of votes towards the Conservatives. And then also, when I say the glitch, I mean after they solved the glitch, the Conservatives gained some votes in the riding on net. And now they found another 28 votes, which I believe that they are preserving to then count later during the judicial recount. At some point, I'd almost just say, just do Guildford over again because it's so messed up. And the fact that people are finding ballots here and there that just got misplaced. How, if you are Han Veer in that riding, the Conservative candidate, are you going to be satisfied if you lose by like 5 votes or 15 votes or anything below 100? That was probably what the real result was, and somebody just didn't misplace something here or there, and that we can totally assume that Gary Bagg won. I don't think that you could actually feel that way. But now I just want to pull up another thing just on now us having David Eby coming out now and saying that we need to have this panel to review election procedures because, man, I really want to push this in all the NDP people's faces who, again, attacked me as if I'm a crazy person for thinking that the process wasn't done well. So we have Richard Zusman here saying, new Premier David Eby says in order to address missing ballots by Elections BC, the BC NDP will propose an all party committee to examine the systems used, steps taken by Elections BC, hear from experts, and recommend improvements for future elections. And you don't even really need an all candidates committee. Maybe poll workers in rural areas shouldn't be storing ballot boxes at their homes. That seems like a bad idea. It's not because I think that they're going to do something, but the whole point is that you should have processes that even if the most mischievous person was involved in BC elections, we would never have to worry if anything would happen because all the ballots are locked in the same location with surveillance. This is also why advanced voting is silly because it requires all this extra surveillance in order to make sure that nobody messes with ballots. I don't even think anyone messed with ballots in this election. But the whole point is that there's all these obvious areas of security failures that need to be resolved. Other things like, again, tabulators have just been slowing down votes, and now there's glitches. I don't think we even have nearly as much issues with counting ballots by hand, and we have far less mistakes. So let's get rid of them, and we get to save money. Maybe, mail-in ballots should be a little bit more secured around how far away do you live from your polling station? Do you have an illness that prevents you from being able to vote in person? Are you, away from home? Do you work for the military? Do you work for the Navy? That seems better to me rather than having just tens of thousands of votes coming in way after election day. Yes, postmarked on the correct day, but now it just becomes this silly game. Oh, not silly game, but it becomes like foolish that we're all sitting around wondering how many votes are still left to come in. The mail-in voting at a day to get your ballot postmarked should be like a week before election day if you are going to vote that way, and it should be limited on who can actually request it. You got legs, you can go down and vote in person. I don't mind that telephone voting is there for people who are blind and it's easier for them. But even when there is like a rainstorm, it shouldn't then result in everyone being able to use the system, a system that's really not meant for everyone to use it, where all you need is like, I think, a SIN card and an ID to vote. What would stop you if you were in a household full of people who just didn't want to vote? You would just picking up their driver's licenses and SIN cards out of their wallets and just start calling in votes for everybody. That's kind of a problem. But anyways, now I just want to move on to something that Kirk Lubenov had said that I thought was actually just a really good point, a way of summarizing all of the issues that we ended up having here, because I think he had a really good recap on the BC election. So Kirk Lubenov, I'm sorry, Kirk, if I ever say your name wrong. As soon as a name is not like the whitest, most English name I've ever seen in my life, I start tripping all over myself. But Kirk says, elections BC recap. Closed voting places because it rained too hard. A password was forgotten for voting machines. 16,000 more mail-in ballots came than anticipated. Staff were allowed to take unmarked ballots and sensitive documents home. 5 districts didn't have valid tabulator tapes against vote entries. Surrey Guildford had 14 miscounted votes. Then the number turned to be 28. Data entry errors in 69 districts. Didn't count votes in a whole ballot box. 3 judicial recounts still to be done by November 12th. There's a third one outside of Surrey Guildford and Kelowna Centre that I'm unaware of. The BC election happened on October 19th and is still not even over, and they told us none of this was possible. Absolute clown show. And I couldn't agree more. This has been a clown show. Saskatchewan got its entire election done fine, mostly in a day. Couple more ridings needed to have some ballots counted the next day for mail-ins. Even then, probably should have to mail it in beforehand so they can actually count on election day. And if it's not in by election day, they're not counting it. And so you can do this better. Anyone can do this better. We have this actually happening in the US where like Arizona and like Pennsylvania and Michigan were preemptively coming out and saying it might take 2 weeks. It's like, what? No, you don't say that. You had how many years to make it faster? Like not even counting from 2020 to 2024, but from 2022 to 2024, you have 2 years. You have 2 years to make the system better. Florida made it better. Saskatchewan and Canada made it better. We have like New Brunswick had gotten it all done beforehand. How is it that you guys suck so bad at BC elections? It's actually sad that I had to see John Rustad have to come up with caveats when he was calling for reforms to be made, that we need process reforms. He had to first caveat by saying, I'm not saying that the results are not the results once all of the actual ballots come in and we properly count them and recount them in some of these districts, but we need to make reforms. It's sad that in our stupid age of legacy media bullies, that we and like NDP party activists online, that we even have to caveat that to say that our elections should function properly. Maybe they should function properly. Maybe people should actually have, their ballots counted on election night, and it doesn't take more than 2-3 weeks to actually know what even occurred. Ugh. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. Also, I'm not trying to be insulting to Brian Burgay, but I did move his little election piece of literature out for Lawrence Mock because, guys, this is Lawrence Mock November or whatever. I'm just making stuff up right now. But he was the candidate I was helping in the last week of the BC election. Lawrence Mock is a fantastic candidate, and he will be a fantastic MLA. We got him across the finish line by 103 votes. So it was a blessing that I was able to be there in the last week, not because I'm particularly fantastic. We just needed warm bodies in that riding, and everyone I worked with ended up basically barely getting that thing over the finish line. Really tough riding. I actually believe we spent like a third of what Bob DeEath had spent in Maple Ridge East. That was an absolute wild ride. And maybe in the future, I will make videos that kind of teach how proper door knocking should work, how proper poll district targeting should work, how proper on the ground local Facebook advertising should work. And I say Facebook specifically because Facebook is still the king of political engagement. People who vote are on Facebook. People who are above the age of 45 are far more likely to vote than people who are under the age of 45. So that's why Facebook works better than X, Instagram, TikTok, all the rest. YouTube is also a great one, but it's YouTube and Facebook because people who vote actually use those two. You never want people to focus way too much on X/Twitter these days because it's the happening kind of a place. But everyone on X is a partisan, a hardcore partisan. It's very difficult to actually sway opinions on somewhere like X because everyone shows up with very strongly held beliefs. Maybe you can mine out an election like BC another 10,000 votes because of your engagement on X, but you're potentially going to be able to get more than 100,000 more votes with really good Facebook advertising, with big organic reach somewhere like there, because people actually will stop and read a message on Facebook. That's why it was so devastating to the National Telegraph when, oh, sorry, gotta get coffee late in the episode. The thing is that people will actually stop and read a message on Facebook. People will stop and read an article. That's why it was so devastating when the Online News Act came into effect and Facebook rightfully so said we're not paying 50 million to the CBC and CTV news every year, so we're just not going to let Facebook have any Canadian news on it. That was devastating to us because 80% of our reach from the National Telegraph's written online paper were from Facebook, because when people get to work in the morning, it's 8 a.m., 8:30. They don't have to start working you don't have to start working right away. It's not even 9 yet. You'll sit there and read 2 or 3 or 4 articles. People don't read articles on X. They scroll. They scroll, like, retweet, and move on. They read a headline. They don't read the whole thing. Facebook was great for meaningful engagement, and that's still the case when it comes to even political engagement. People will read messages, watch political videos, a lot more stuff on Facebook. I think Polyev probably has way more reach when it comes to Facebook than he does X, Instagram, TikTok, and all the other things combined. Anyway, so that's it for me today, guys. If you want to support the show, donate to the Give Send Go fund in the description of the video below, as well as pinned at the top of the comments. And also pinned at the top of the comments is my personal website, WyattClaypool.com. If you guys want to sign up on the contact form, it will allow me to give you federal, provincial nomination and leadership race recommendations on good candidates to vote for. I always try and drive people towards the most orthodox conservative candidates, people who are both fiscally and socially conservative, but always there are some always mitigating factors within that. Somebody might be able to edge someone out in my mind, even if they're not the perfect conservative, as long as they're super good on specific issues. We have leadership races coming up in New Brunswick and Manitoba. So if you live in those two provinces, definitely sign up on the website. I already have somebody in Manitoba I will strongly be giving an endorsement to, and I have somebody in New Brunswick I want to encourage to run for the PC leadership race. And in 2025, we will be having a mayoral election in Calgary and I think Toronto as well. So if you live in any of those jurisdictions, make sure to sign up on the website and I can get you voting information, good candidates to back, volunteer for, donate to through the website's email list. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. Have a good one. Finally, I keep rambling. Oh.